Nowadays, it seems like we are all growing tired of democracy. While democracies function as expected, as we get to vote and share our opinions, it seems like we are only growing more and more dissatisfied and disconnected with the democratic process. You might live in a democracy and are familiar with this feeling. You might be engaged, follow the news, go out to vote, but democracy feels like an unstoppable force, impossible to stop or control. However, you're not the only one feeling this way. This feeling has actually been identified as what the Belgian author David van Reybrouck calls the democratic fatigue syndrome. This term describes why you feel this frustration or disillusionment and why the whole democratic system is just operating without really delivering on its promises. Just look at the United States, where a crazy election cycle reflected a deeper disillusionment within the whole democratic system. Or take the United Kingdom, where the Labour Party won a landslide victory, which normally should be an static moment, but the election was more marked by dissatisfaction, with many people feeling like their votes didn't matter and real change isn't coming. In this video, we're going to explore why so many people are frustrated with democracy, what's really behind the democratic fatigue syndrome, and why the democratic fatigue syndrome reveals a bigger contradiction about our democracies itself. The democratic fatigue syndrome describes a state where citizens feel disillusioned and disconnected with the function of democracy. The author who introduced the concept, David van Reybrouck, argues that this isn't just a temporary frustration with our leaders or political outcomes, but a deeper, more enduring feeling that the democratic system itself is stuck in a cycle of inefficiency. And real-life statistics can show very clearly that our societies are suffering from the democratic fatigue syndrome through two major crises: the crisis of legitimacy and the crisis of efficiency. The crisis of legitimacy reflects a growing feeling that many people are becoming increasingly disconnected from the system, as they don't feel represented anymore. This can be explained through three major symptoms. The first symptom is the decline in voter turnout. Fewer people are voting and it's becoming harder to encourage participation. Global voter turnout has been decreasing in every region since the 1950s. Even in Europe, the continent with the most established democracies, there's been a sharp decline in voter turnout. And what's even more striking is that this decline persists in both free and non-free elections, whether citizens feel like they have a real choice or not. It is crazy to think about how many people don't vote in elections that can decide the future of our countries and our lives. For example, in the United States, didn't vote would have won every presidential election since World War II, except for the 2020 election. Beyond low voter turnout, another key symptom is increasing voter volatility. People are becoming less loyal to specific political parties, often switching their support between elections. This results in significant swings in voting behavior, with turnover rates of 10%, 20% or even over 30% being common in many elections. Recently, this infographic went viral that showed how every governing party facing election in 2024 in a developed country lost their election, with the United States as an obvious example. However, in my opinion, this infographic also shows that most governing parties lose elections, and especially in much higher rates since the 1990s. The last symptom is the sharp decline in political party membership, as fewer people are formally involved in party politics. Across EU member states, less than 4.65% of eligible voters are party members, a significant drop compared to a few decades ago. And this decline matters, as in some countries party members hold significant power. In the UK, for example, the Conservative Party once had 2 to 3 million members, but today it has just around 170,000. Yet it was the small group of members who chose the new Prime Minister after both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss resigned, meaning that a small fraction of the population selected a leader for the entire country. However, the democratic fatigue syndrome isn't just about people feeling disconnected or questioning legitimacy. A big part of it comes from frustration with how inefficient governments have become. This isn't only about politics, but about the sheer difficulty of getting things done in today's world. And the crisis of efficiency is characterized by two major symptoms. First of all, governing has become less attractive for political parties. Countries with a parliamentary system, such as Italy, Spain, Belgium, and the Netherlands, can be left without a functioning government for months, sometimes even years. One reason this happens is because political parties have grown more distrustful of each other and are more focused on their own electoral gains. As a result, they negotiate every little detail in coalition talks, which delays forming a government. This goes together with the fact that governments are facing increasing backlash from voters, giving them also less initiative to govern with the long term and stability in mind. And even in presidential systems, this has become more common, such as many South American countries or even recently in the United States, where for the first time in a long time 2 presidents didn't get re-elected. But most importantly, governments work very slow nowadays. Everybody has examples from the country of large projects that struggle to get off the ground and are only completed with great difficulty, whether it's about infrastructure or innovation investments or just simply making a decision for the benefit of society. Furthermore, governments are nowadays constrained by many external factors, such as national debt, multinational corporations, global treaties, and much more, which makes it seem nearly impossible to tackle pressing challenges such as climate change, migration, or the housing shortage. So after reflecting on all these things in our world today, we can feel a sense of desperation. As citizens, we can feel powerless in the face of all these crises and events, and our limited ability to resolve them. But the question remains, does this disillusionment actually mean that people are giving up on democracy itself? And that's exactly what 2 professors, Roberto Stefan Foa and Yascha Mounk, tried to argue in their 2016 article called Democratic Disconnect. And in 2017, the New York Times drew attention to this research with an eye-catching headline. The authors claim that even in the most stable democracies, we're seeing democratic decline among younger people. The essence is captured in this graph, where we see that the percentage of people who say it's essential to live in a democracy is declining with each generation, from the silent generation and baby boomers to the millennials. This argument may seem convincing at first, but this is not everything to the story. First, there were concerns about the methodology. Foa and Mounk made a conclusion from only extreme scores, that is, people who rated democracy a perfect 10 on a 1 to 10 scale. Another graph made with the exact same survey shows that on average democracy still scores very high, even in non-democratic places like Russia. Furthermore, what Foa and Mounk call the generational effect might be more of an age effect, as we know that young people are often less invested into societal structures and often more willing to vote or think extreme. However, the professors did touch on something important here. If we see real-life statistics and events showing that democracy is not working as efficient and we don't feel represented anymore, why shouldn't that lead to democratic decline? After all, there seems to be a contradiction in our attitude and experience with democracy. People still support democracy in theory, as seen in the earlier survey or in this global research from Pew, where they found out that the majority still believes in some sort of democracy, with a much higher percent than strong leaders or military rule. But it's the practical experience of living within a democracy that often leads to disbelief and disillusionment. And this explains the democratic fatigue syndrome. People still believe in the system, but are increasingly frustrated with how it's being run. Many believe that elected officials are out of touch, that political parties don't represent them, and that their leaders are failing to deliver. And Pew shows that this sentiment is present in many countries, from Spain to Argentina to South Korea or to France. In fact, almost everywhere. People still back the democratic model, but are frustrated with its execution. And it is this contradiction that reveals a deeper paradox. Democracy inspires hope in us, but it also fuels disillusionment. In theory, we would expect for democracy to be the perfect system. It gives power to the people, promotes equality, and ensures accountability. So why does it often feel so messy and frustrating in practice? What is it about democracy that creates such a fatigue and frustration even as we continue to believe in it? The answer lays in the very nature of democracy itself. The democracy is built upon conflicting ideals. Democracy acknowledges that societies are diverse and that this diversity inevitably creates tension. We talk about the will of the people, but people rarely agree on what that actually means. We want majority rule, but also demand protections for minority rights. We expect strong, decisive leadership, yet insist that leaders remain responsive and accountable. People often have a very different definition of democracies. Some see it as minimal, just free elections and basic rights, while others focus on a more maximal definition of democracy, with participatory decision-making and economic justice. And this mismatch in expectations makes it harder to feel satisfied with how democracy functions. Furthermore, modern governance has become incredibly complex. Many of the most pressing issues, like climate change, healthcare, or economic inequality, require sophisticated policies and technical expertise that aren't always apparent to the average voter. This often creates a gap between public expectations and what's realistically achievable, and when the complexities of governments aren't communicated well, people may feel like nothing is getting done, or that politicians are intentionally dragging their feet, feeding into feelings of disillusionment. And emotions, cognitive biases often shape how we perceive politics. While democracies was built upon the idea of the rational voter, this is a myth, as we are often irrational, emotional, and systematically biased. We easily fall into cognitive traps, such as the bandwagon effect, negativity biases, or in-group thinking, and are easily controlled by our emotions, such as anger, fear, or nostalgia. And this can be made worse by traditional and social media, who often amplify these distortions by creating echo chambers and sensationalizing scandals. And the last big reason why a democracy seems to fueled with frustration and disillusionment is because distrust in politics has become a political force itself. Many voters are now aligning with parties based on their level of trust in the system. The distrustful voter often rallies around parties that position themselves as anti-establishment or those that challenge the status quo. In countries like the Netherlands, Romania, Germany, the United States, voters are increasingly divided along lines of political trust, as seen in the recent electoral wins of far-right parties or candidates, whose supporters express the lowest level of trust in the system. However, this politicization of distrust often creates a vicious cycle. Parties that win by appealing to disillusioned voters frequently fail to propose concrete solutions for rebuilding trust. Instead of reversing the tide, they can deepen the crisis by fostering further skepticism and frustration. In this way, the issue may be less about a citizen-led crisis of trust and more about a failure of political leadership. A certain level of distrust is healthy, but it are the leaders who are failing to turn dissatisfaction into meaningful reforms. So while democracy's messiness can be frustrating, it's also a reflection of its complexity. The system wasn't designed to be simple, it was designed to manage disagreements and diversity. But when democracy feels too messy, when people become too frustrated and tired with the democratic system, the simplicity of alternatives like populism, technocracy, or autocracy can seem tempting. These solutions promise to cut through disagreements, all in different ways. Populism frames the political battle as one between a corrupt elite, usually in power, and a challenger who claims to represent the good people. For populists, the political opponent is corrupt. Populism appeals to those who feel ignored or betrayed by the system. Technocracy focuses on administrative values like efficiency and expertise. For technocrats, the opponent is incompetent and needs to be set straight. As a solution, technocracy promises streamlined, expert-led decision-making to government challenges. And autocracy appeals to those who believe only a strong leader can tackle the complex crisis we face. For autocrats, the opposition is seen as weak and ineffective, and as a solution, autocracy offers decisive action in time of political gridlock. But here's the catch. None of these systems can escape the conflict that democracy embraces. They either suppress disagreements or let them simmer beneath the surface. Democracy's strength lies in its messiness. It doesn't avoid the battle of values, but it channels it into a system where everyone gets a voice. People who are too fatigued of democracy go beyond democracy's strength, that it embraces disagreements instead of suppressing it. After all, in our complex societies nowadays, you will always be a minority on one topic. So if the strength of democracy is its messiness, the challenge isn't to erase it, but to manage it better. Democratic reforms such as strengthening political institutions, courts and the press can help protect minorities and challenge policies. Electoral systems can be reformed and citizens' assemblies and inclusive deliberation can give citizens a more direct role in decision making and make democracy more resilient. Examples are New Zealand's adoption of proportional representation or Ireland's citizens' assemblies on same-sex marriage. But democracy in its purest form is self-governing by the people. It is important that people stay connected and interested, with a healthy level of distrust to understand our society's blind spots and make the system work better for all of us. In the end, democracy is truly for the people. The fact that we together can choose our own political elites is an unicum in history. And that's why democracy's success relies on citizens who are informed, engaged, and are willing to grapple with its complexities. So, while democracy might sometimes feel exhausting and uncontrollable, we've seen that this frustration is part of its design. It's messy because we're messy as people, with conflicting values and priorities, and that's exactly why it works. In the end, democracy isn't about avoiding disagreements, it's about finding ways to live with them and grow stronger through them. Through democratic processes, we can confront and address the crises affecting our societies, but this requires us to stay engaged, understand the system and work to improve it. And that's why, for all its flaw, we still believe in it, and why its messiness might just be its greatest strength. And that is exactly what we aim to do on this channel. We explore the issues, make us connect more to our society's everyday realities, and discover how we can make democracy work for all of us. We'll try to understand what democracy truly means. We'll try to define democracy, rule of law, and look at its history. We'll research its different aspects, such as elections, trias politica, political equality, freedom of expression, and the influence of civil societies. We'll examine the challenges facing democracy, such as polarization, populism, corruption, lobbying, societal shifts, and globalization. And we'll also explore the impact of media and post-truth, government impotence due to short-term focus, flaw in our electoral systems, and the complexity of the issues at hand. And we'll take a closer look at the players in the political world, such as politicians, citizens, bureaucrats, the media, and much more. So, if you're ready to explore the complexities of democracy with me, don't forget to subscribe and join the conversation in the comments. I want to know what frustrates you the most about democracy and how do you think it can be improved. And I hope you're just as excited to follow this channel as I am.